Good evening, members, and good evening, members of the public that are here this evening. And can I welcome those people watching on the webcast? I would like to make a special welcome to a resident who is watching on the webcast. He's a resident in my ward, and he watches every single planning meeting. He says he hasn't missed one. He finds them far more interesting than watching the television. So you are all stars in his eyes. And I was so delighted to think that we've got a regular watcher. Item 1, apologies for absence. I have apologies for absence from Councillor Abbott and Councillor Unsworth. Everyone else here? Yes. Item 2, declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest or non-pecuniary interest relating to items on the agenda having regard to the Code of Conduct for members? No, that must change. Item 3, the minutes. Members, the minutes of the last meeting, which was on the 20th of July, are not yet available, so they will come forward at the next meeting. Item 4, public question time. We have no general public questions on planning this evening. Those that wish to speak will speak prior to each application. So we then go on to item 5, planning applications. We have no items in part B this evening. We have just 2 applications in part A. So we'll go straight on to the part A applications. And the first part A application is application number 200038 REM, land north of Colchester Road, Coggeshall. And we do have one speaker on this item, and the speaker is Miss Libby Hindle from Boyer Planning. Would you like to come and make your statement? And can I remind you, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Since the outline application was granted for this site in 2019, the applicants, Vistry Homes, formerly Bovis Homes, have sought to prioritise the delivery of this development. They have engaged in meaningful and constructive consultation with officers and the Parish Council in particular in order to bring forward proposals that respond effectively to the parameters of the outline consent and the neighbourhood, local and national policy position, as well as local resident representations. This engagement has helped inform the high degree of quality proposed and ensure that the development complements the village, creates distinct character and a strong sense of place. As your officers have reported, the proposals respond to the evidence housing need through the provision of a suitable mix and distribution of housing types, sizes and tenure. All housing will meet national prescribed space standards and are compliant with the Essex Design Guide in terms of garden sizes and back-to-back distances. It was apparent from local consultation that there is a lack of demand locally for a nursery. As such, the proposals present details of a community building with a flexible internal arrangement for potential future uses. The design of the building has taken influence from a local monastic barn, but with a contemporary approach, with feature brickwork and a full-height glazed walls. The layout and landscape proposals present a series of linked multifunctional areas of public open space of different size and character to create a rich landscape setting for the development. SUDs and natural flood management are incorporated into the landscape and built form, and the landscape acoustic bund has been designed to provide noise and air pollution mitigation from the A120. The landscape strategy responds to the site's natural landscape features and the Essex Way which runs through the site. Existing trees and hedgerows are retained where possible, and substantial new planting is proposed, including a variety of native trees, wildflower planting, to create a quality environment that is resilient to climate change and supports biodiversity. Vistry have sought to present a carefully considered scheme that accords with the fundamental principles of the outline permission. The application offers a sensitive yet distinctive addition to Coggeshall that respects local resident amenity and responds to the clear design objectives of the neighbourhood plan. The delivery of 300 homes, of which 120 will be affordable tenures, will boost local housing supply and assist the Council in addressing housing need. The proposed layout provides a legible hierarchy of streets that, along with landscaped open spaces, help create distinctive character and encourages social interaction within the development and with residents of the wider village. The proposals are compliant with the relevant policies of the Development Plan, the MPPF, the National Design Guide and the Neighbourhood Plan. As has been recommended by your officers, we politely request that the application be approved to enable this sustainable development to be delivered. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Hindle. Thank you. Members, we have no one else wishing to speak on this item, so we'll now go to the presentation, and the presentation is going to be made by Tim Hayes. Good evening, Tim, and thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good evening, members. Okay. So this is a reserved matters application. It's for scale, layout, appearance and landscaping, and it follows outline planning consent, which was granted originally in 2019 and then varied following that. And it relates to the erection of 300 dwellings, including 40% affordable, community building, associated internal roads, parking, drainage, infrastructure, open space and landscaping. And the site is land north of Colchester Road, Coggeshall. So site location plan. The site is located on the eastern side of Coggeshall. It's quite a large site, bounded to the north, to the west and to the south by existing development. To the east we have the A120. To the north is Tay Road, which then becomes a bridleway around this point. And to the south is Colchester Road. So some site photographs. I'm going to work around the site, roughly starting in the north. So this is Tay Road. The photographs are clear enough. This is Tay Road. The site boundary is here, and the site is on the left of the photograph. As you move further down Tay Road towards the A120, it becomes a bridleway, and the application site here is still on the left-hand side. And then as you move down to the other end of Tay Road, back towards Colne Road, the application site is now on the right-hand side behind these houses here. There is an important point in this photo, which is the application site includes a section of this garden here, which allows a footpath link to be put in. At the moment, as I'm sure members are aware, Tay Road has no footpath, so you're forced to walk in the road. It's almost single track along here, and there would now be a footpath link through here, so it's quite an important point. Northern site area. Still up in the north of the site, there are Tay Roads on the left here. There's two existing dwellings which project into the application site, a pair of semi-detached dwellings. They're not within the red line, but they are one of the neighbours which are most affected. And then turning the other way, so standing on Tay Road looking towards Colchester Road, so looking in a southerly direction, you can see the majority of the application site here extending away from the photograph. Colchester Road is right on the horizon here. Moving up into the northern, staying in the northern part of the site, these dwellings are actually on Colne Road, so this is the rear elevations of their houses along Colne Road. And on the right here is that hedgerow that we saw with Tay Road just beyond, so we're still up in the top part of the application site. Some views externally. So standing on the A120 with the application site on the right-hand side of the photograph beyond this boundary hedge, it's worth mentioning that the Noisebund, which is proposed, which would run along the entire eastern boundary, it would run on the other side of this hedgerow. So I'll come back to that point later, but it's just worth remembering it would be on the other side of that hedgerow. Stepping inside the site, this is that same boundary line, so that's the A120 hedgerow, and just to show really the context on the inside and the outside of the site. Then moving into the middle of the site, we've got the Essex Way, which crosses the site from west to east or east to west, depending on which way you're moving, but it runs right across the centre of the site at the lowest part of the site. So this is the Essex Way we're looking at here. And then it sort of terminates, as it were, in terms of the site around here where the site boundary is, but it continues on through into the village through this link here. View northwards, so now moving down to the southern end of the site, looking back to the north. So the A120 is on the right-hand side. The Tay Road is up at the far end here on the horizon. And you can see the Essex Way at the lowest point here moving across the site. Then moving to the far south of the site, these now are the backs of the houses which front onto Colchester Road. This garage here is actually part of the application site and would obviously be demolished and would disappear, but that's where the main site entrance would come in. And then in the centre of the site, this photo really just took to emphasise the topography of the site. There's a fall of approximately 10 metres from the highest to the lowest point. Because of the way it sort of works in the lie of the land, it is actually quite a marked fall. It doesn't sound that much, but actually on site it is quite marked around this area in particular. And again, you can see here, I'm actually standing at the lowest part of the site looking back up. You can see how the land rises away and the impact it has on the existing houses. So back to the southern site boundary up by Colchester Road again. So what we're looking at, part of the photo there is that garage which would be demolished where the site entrance would come in. Just a close-up view. So that's the garage. Site entrance would come in here. This photo is important because it shows the location of the community centre, which would be approximately where my cursor is here. And you can see the closest neighbours with their boundary along here. Then a final couple of photos. Another photo really just to show the topography of the site. This is taken fairly centrally but looking north towards Tay Road. And then finally an external view of the proposed access, so where that garage would be demolished, that's where the site access would go in. The proposed layout plan, if I just talk through the key points on it really. It's a large site, but it's quite a regular shape and lends itself quite well to a development of this scale. Got three large parcels of development, so the northern one here, the central one here, and then the southern parcel here. In between those are two large areas of open space. The Essex Way crosses this area of open space, you can see it here. We've got two dry suds basins here and two wet suds basins here. The southern area of open space, there's two dry suds basins. And then in terms of children's play space, it's just worth pointing out we've got three areas. So there's a northern area in this linear section of open space. There's a northern children's play area, one in the centre, and then quite a large one to the south. The Noisebund you can see on the eastern side of this plan, which runs along the A120 boundary, and then you can see there's a trim trail which runs inside that. A couple of other points just to note. The main access is down here. The community building which I mentioned sits here by the main access, and it has a small area of open space adjacent to it. And then you'll note around the boundary of the entire site is this landscape buffer, and these are all the parameters that were approved at the outline stage. So there's a standoff from the existing dwellings. The two dwellings that project into the site are up here. And then in terms of pedestrian connections, the link to Tay Road, which I mentioned, runs along the top of the site here, and then you can just about see it coming out through this thin section, which is where we saw it on the photograph. And you can see that there's quite a lot of houses out of shot here, but those plus these new ones would all be using this access rather than walking down Tay Road. So the Noisebund, I just wanted to show a cross-section of this really, so you can just get a feel for the profile of it. It varies in height because of the topography of the site, but at its highest it's about 4 metres. So what we did was ask for it to be profiled so that you get this softer angle inside the site, so that the outlook for the new dwellings won't be too severe. And then on the A120 side, where it will sit behind that hedgerow, it's much steeper. The proposal would be to put a sort of mesh over the top of it, which would allow green planting, so you wouldn't have a bare face, you would have a green face. But on the softer side here, you could actually have quite substantial planting, tree planting, hedges, etc. The TenYear Plan, essentially the TenYear is split pretty evenly across the site. So the pink and the orange are the affordable, and the yellow is the market. So if you look at the three parcels, you can see they're clustered, as we would expect, but they're spread pretty well across the three parcels. Building heights plan, the majority is 2-storey, which is the yellow. Single storey, which is all garages in this area, is the purple. But the bungalows, which are quite a marked feature at the site, all single storey down this side. And then there's some elements of 2.5-storey which link back to the parameter plans. So they're at focal points on the site. So a couple at the top, a couple in the middle, and then some dotted around down to the south. House types. There's a good selection of house types. I've just picked out some really at random to show different sort of styles. The officer view is that these are really quite high quality. And what we've got is a modern take on traditional design. So you see the features such as the gables and pitched roofs. But we've also got a more modern take, such as these windows, large windows that emphasise they're projecting, and they would be made from modern materials that would contrast against the render or the brickwork within which they were set. And I'll show some CGI images shortly to bring those to life a bit. Chimneys, good spread of chimneys across the site. Materials, we're looking at brick, render, weatherboarding. Porches, we've got flat roofs, modern feature doors. So it's a sort of new twist on a traditional design. Some further examples just to show some of the semi-detached types. We're obviously previously looking at detached, so these are now semi-detached. And then moving into terraced. And also the 2.5-storey, so I just wanted to show some of the height differences here. So you can see 2.5-storey with the dormers cut into the roof slopes. And then just to contrast really, this is an example of some of the bungalow types. There are several different types, but this is one. And just to show those contrasted against the 2.5-storey dwellings. The community building, it's quite an exciting design, I think, really. It's based on a traditional Essex barn, but again with a modern take. So you can see the rectangular modern window features, large expanses of glass, features on the brickwork. So it's, again, a modern take on a traditional approach. So to bring those to life a bit, they are obviously a bit bland. This is to give you a better view of what it would look like. So on the left, we're looking at the main entrance here, just sort of probably 20 metres into it. On the left is the community building, and then you can see the houses here, different house types. Again, another shot just at the corner of the community building, looking back out of the site. Then moving further into the site, you can see the differences in materials. This is a semi-detached property here. I think that's semi-detached or even terraced on the left-hand side. Properties fronting onto areas of open space, so different materials. You can see the feature chimneys on some of these houses. Got bricks. You can see again that was one of the feature windows that I was referring to. Same again, really. Other shots just to show different angles on these houses fronting onto the open space. And the bungalow one, I think this is quite an interesting shot. It shows just a different character, different parts of the site. This is much more intimate. See the line of bungalows that we saw earlier on the plan view, just running up the western boundary of the site, and then on the opposite side is 2-storey, but it's quite a different character to the other shots that we were looking at. So, in conclusion, our view is that the design, layout, scale and landscaping are acceptable. The house types are of a high standard and are quite unique in their own way. There's no identified heritage harm. Biodiversity enhancement strategy has been identified. Tree-lined streets have been achieved, although this was pre the new MPPF, as I set out in the report, but we have achieved tree-lined streets. The internal highway layout is considered to be acceptable. The scheme was revised several times in response to comments made by myself and the urban designer to ensure that neighbour impact was acceptable and kept to a minimum. And the applicant worked well, and I think it's worth mentioning again on this scheme, as with the one we had at the previous committee. This applicant has also worked very constructively with officers and responded to a lot of comments and concerns, queries that we've raised. So overall, we consider this is now a well-designed and carefully considered scheme, and we recommend that the reserve matters is approved. I've got one brief update, which is an additional condition which is recommended. So this follows a discussion with the Environmental Health Officer. And the recommendation is a condition to control the hours of use of the community building from 0800 to 2200 hours. We don't know precisely what the use would be that goes into there, but the Environmental Health Officer's view is that it would be better to put a precautionary condition in place, and in theory that could be varied if appropriate at a later date, but at least we put a marker down now, as it were. So the recommendation would be that it will be subject to that additional condition 16. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Tim. Thank you for a very detailed presentation. Members. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. When this came before us before, there was quite a deal of local apprehension about the possible impact on the historic core of Coggeshall. Absolutely understandable, and those of us that supported the application were hoping that something could be devised that complemented historic Coggeshall rather than be in competition with it. And I think overall the application achieves that. I know that there's a timely reminder from the Historic Buildings Consultant that under the MPPF requirements, development should be sympathetic to local character and history, but also they note that no heritage assets actually fall within the site, and that the ones on the periphery have minimal impact. So no objection from the historic building consultant. I think it's very laudable that managed to keep to the policies of the Coggeshall Neighbourhood Plan and the Design Code. And again, that's down to a productive interchange between our officers and particularly with the Parish Council, which is very, very gratifying. And we're told in the report there have been changes in the layout to address the concerns of the Parish Council as well as officers over things like the impact on those few neighbours. So I think that we can agree with Tim's conclusion that this is a well-designed and a well-thought-out, well-considered application, and I shall support it, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mann. Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I agree with Councillor Mann's sentiments on this. I think it's good. I like the housing mix. I think there isn't an overly large number of 4-bedroom homes on the market mix. We do need larger houses because we have families with children, but also with parents, grandparents living with them these days. So we do need 4- and 5-bedroom homes, but it's nice to see that there's a very decent number of 2- and 3-bed homes in there as well, and that applies to the affordable mix as well. I'm also really pleased with the way the affordable homes are split across the site. I know that's something that we always aim for. I have to say it doesn't always entirely come off, but I think in this on this site it does. They are quite nicely dotted around. very pleased to see a community building instead of the nursery, which residents said there wasn't a need for. So rather than just more homes or whatever, we've got a community centre, and I do think the design is really interesting. I really like that. And the landscaping, I think, is probably as good as we've seen. I think it's fairly obvious quite a lot of thought has gone into it and discussion with officers. So all in all, yes, I think it's high quality and it's pleasing. And I hope that residents who, as Councillor Mann said, were sort of fearful about how it was going to look and the impact on what is one of our most historic villages, I hope they will find that when it is developed, that actually it slots in quite well. And I hope it is, is appreciated. So I'm not sure if Councillor Mann actually moved officers' recommendation. Well, I'll move officers' recommendation for approval then, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. Does it find a second? It does. Councillor Ritchie, did you wish to speak?
Please, that's okay, Madam Chairman. I'll be brief. I think what stuck out to me when I was reading the officer's report was the comments from Coggeshall Parish Council, who at the outline phase had expressed a number of concerns. It was really good to read that kind of sentence around following a series of constructive meetings with the developer regarding the allocated site. Coggeshall Parish Council is happy to see the developer is adhering to the policies within the Coggeshall Neighbourhood Plan, which shows that actually neighbourhood plans that are adopted and passed through referendum and worked through this council do work, and they will work. It was really good to see that actually that is a part of this report. Just on the presentation, thank you, Tim. It was a really good presentation. I think on the post layout, what appeals to me is those bungalows down that western edge, closest to existing development. That's going to be the kind of lowest point of that development that's kind of seen from anyone close to that boundary edge as you kind of move through the site to the southern element. Obviously, the houses are further away from existing developments. There's even consideration given to the nearest neighbours on there too. So, yeah, I think it's a really well thought out plan. Happy to second, Madam Chairman. Thank you.
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Yes, thank you. I agree with a lot of what's been said already, and particularly I agree with Councillor Ritchie's point about how pleasing it is to see that developer working so closely with the Parish Council and also the officers. We all want a good design in the end, at the end of the day. So it's pleasing to see that by working together, a better development can come forward. I just would like to comment actually on the design. I really like the design. I like the way it's not competing with the historic core of Coggeshall. It's not trying to replicate it, but it's trying to echo it, but in a modern way. I think it's a really nice way of addressing that, particularly in the context of Coggeshall. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Parker. Councillor Spray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I agree with a lot of the colleagues' comments earlier. I think in particular, I note that electric car parking charges are going to be put into all the properties, which I think is future-proofing, and I'm pleased to see that. I'm also pleased to see the fibre to the premises going to be for every household as well, as I think that's important. Again, comments on the community building I think is much better than the nursery, and the design is good, the split, but I also think the way the site has actually been divided and actually takes advantage of the natural flow of the landscape to build in the open spaces and the landscaping is really well thought of. And I think that's going to give, rather than one just overall site, it actually appears to be in three. And I think that will give a lot of character and definition to the site overall. And I'm very pleased to see the thought of the acoustic barrier, which is going to help. I know in the future, hopefully with electric vehicles or hydrogen vehicles, alternative powers, that there shouldn't be so much noise anyway, but I think that will be a good safety value anyway. But overall, I do agree with officers and commend them for their negotiations. However, I would like to take this opportunity to ask officers if they know what kind of energy is going to fuel all of these houses, because I think that's a concern, considering potential changes in building regulations in 2025? Is it mostly going to be oil and gas, or is it going to be alternative? And also, what is the recommendation for energy building of these houses, please?
Yes, thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In terms of fuel, yes, it would simply plug into the existing network. So I know that they've taken a fabric-first approach in terms of it will be a building regs-led matter, and it will need to meet the latest building regs. So it's not something where there are solar panels, etc., bolted on the outside. It is fabric-first. But yeah, it would plug into the existing network. We're still not in a position where we have enough policy clout to say, for example, 40% of the houses must be solar powered, something along those lines. There is a policy in the new local plan which proposes a percentage, which I think off the top of my head is 20% from solar panels. But my understanding is that's being considered by the planning inspector at the moment, and I believe there may be a query over our evidence base for that. So at the moment we're led by building regs on that point. Sorry, there was a second question, Councillor Spray.
Yes, I just wondered if you had any idea of the standard of insulation and energy uses, i.e. EPC, of the buildings that are going to be constructed.
I don't, in all truth, simply because it's something that building regs covers. So it will be compliance with the latest building regs, and if they change as the scheme's being built, then they would need to meet the latest building reg standards.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry, I can't see who. Oh, Councillor Horner, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very impressed at the amount of work that's been done between the developers and the council. The attention to detail is very impressive. I think these homes will be very sought after because it's got access to the retail outlets in Coggeshall, which is very few estates are that close to some good shopping. Also, by keeping it separate, they haven't spoiled any of the vehicle accesses to Coggeshall. I support the application.
Thank you, Councillor. Does anyone else wish to add anything further or new? No. Well, it has been moved and seconded. It was moved by Councillor Mrs. Spray, seconded by Councillor Ritchie, and with the additional condition 16, which I presume you're both happy with, that we grant this application. I'm now going to put that to the vote. All those in favour of granting this application? I think that's unanimous. Thank you, members. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Tim. Thank you. Now brings us to the next application, which is application number 2001264 out, land north of Malden Road, Hatfield, Peveril. This can be found on pages 35 to 88, and we do have two speakers on this application. And the first person wishing to make a statement is Councillor Mike Renault. He is from Hatfield, Peveril Parish Council. Councillor Renault. I know you don't need reminding. You've been before. You have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members. The Parish Council supports development within the parish that accords with the development plans both adopted and emerging. This application is the fourth development outside Section 2 of the emerging local plan in examination. It is well documented that the reason for granting past consents into the countryside were on the grounds that the LPA did not have a 5-year housing land supply. The Council can now demonstrate the 5-year land supply of 5.34. Permissions have previously been granted for over 500 dwellings because this could not be demonstrated and members were concerned with appeal costs. It is now not justified to grant this application having regard to the development boundary and countryside policies which can be deemed as not out of date, and the NDP carries full weight with Part 2 of the local plan carrying limited weight. Officers have confirmed there is conflict with the adopted local plan and neighbourhood plan. The NDP development boundary is adopted. While it is true that it doesn't totally restrict development, the intent is clear within the context of the MPPF. The applicants, through representations on the NDP or any subsequent legal action, have not challenged the development boundary. In accordance with Para 66 of the MPF, the LPA have provided an indicative requirement figure for the parish, which has been verified by ACOM as meeting the parish need for the planned period. Could officers please explain why they consider this required examination prior to it being provided by the LPA? What is alarming is that new housing being delivered is of the wrong type and largely unaffordable to Braintree residents, even under First Home's discounted property scheme. Housing need for the district has been established through Section 1 examination. The LPA recognises this is providing an additional 1,840 dwellings due to inflated mortality rates. 83% of the district requirement is already met through consents. Allowing for mortality rates, it would stand at 96%. Policy CS1 provides a combined minimum total of 600 additional dwellings across all key service villages. This target has surely been met. Each application granted in Hatfield Peveril as a key service village has been deemed sustainable. With overall dwelling numbers rising by 30% within the next 5 years, the parish is now unsustainable. Granting this application will impact the standard of living of all residents. Traffic on Malden Road, mainly from Malden District, is of great concern. Essex Local Highways Authority not raised any objections, which the parish found astonishing. The parish referred members to Malden District Strategy and Resources Committee meeting on Thursday the 15th, 2021, July, on A12 widening, where Malden Road issues are continually raised. If this application is granted, then there is no consistency in decision making. The parish wish to recall they cannot support development that will further harm poor air quality within the village, already failing WHO standards. Air quality assessment have confirmed that the pollutants will remain above these levels through permissions already granted. If this application is approved, the parish believe there should be a well-designed proposal at this stage. The applicant will not be the developer at reserved matters, and the parish, from experience, has no faith it will appear at the later stage. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much indeed for coming along and speaking, Councillor Renner. The next person wishing to make a statement is Mr. Chris Lee. He's speaking on behalf of Gladman Developments. I will also remind you, Mr. Lee, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Can I first start by thanking the case officer for her professional consideration of the application and by stating that the applicant fully supports her recommendation. Members, it is imperative that this council supports sustainable development irrespective of the 5-year housing land supply position. The officer's report outlines that the supply position remains marginal and heavily dependent upon the maintenance of a good throughput of applications. In such cases, the decision maker must assess the level of harm caused by the proposals and balance this against the benefits. If it is considered that the benefits outweigh the harm, then this is a strong material consideration indicating that planning permission should be granted out with the development plan. Members, if I may, I wish to take a short amount of time to outline the benefits that this proposal will bring to Hatfield Peveril and the wider district. The provision of up to 110 dwellings should be afforded significant weight in any event, given the marginal land supply position. And in particular, the provision of 40% affordable housing should be afforded significant weight in light of the continued stark affordability issues in the district. These dwellings will be provided in a key service village on the A12 corridor, which is recognised in the adopted local plan as a sustainable location with a range of services and facilities and a strong focus for growth. A considerable amount of open space will be provided in excess of policy requirements, and this will tie in with the open space to be provided as part of the permitted Glen Eagles Way scheme to the north of the site, and will provide accessible open space for both new and existing residents of the village. A package of measures has been agreed with officers to further boost sustainable transport provision in Hatfield Peveril, including Braintree's first electric car club scheme, which will be actively promoted to existing residents of the village alongside the new residents. Furthermore, there will be economic benefits and contributions towards local education and healthcare provision. Balanced against this, your officers have assessed the application and have identified no significant harm in respect of landscape, heritage, highways or any other technical matter. And whereas issues have been raised by statutory consultees, the applicant has worked proactively with officers over the last 12 months to ensure that they are addressed to their satisfaction. and furthermore the applicant has worked with officers to ensure that the proposal complies with all relevant policies of the neighbourhood plan. The development before you represents sustainable development in a sustainable location, and by tying any approval to the parameters plan, members can be confident that any development coming forward at the reserved matters stage will be of high quality. Negotiations have already been ongoing in respect of the Section 106 agreement, and this is now substantively agreed between the parties, meaning that any resolution to grant planning permission could be quickly implemented. Members, it is clear that in this case, the benefits of the proposal far outweigh any limited harm, and that this represents a strong material consideration in favour of the grant of planning permission, and I therefore respectfully urge you to follow the officer's recommendation and approve the application this evening. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. And that brings us to the end of people wishing to make a statement on our planning applications this evening. We now come to the presentation of this application, which is going to be made by Catherine Orman. Thank you, Catherine.
Okay, so you have before you an outline planning application with all matters reserved with the exception of access. It is for demolition of existing buildings on the site and for the redevelopment of it for up to 110 dwellings. That would include 40% affordable housing, public open space, structural planting and landscaping, surface water flood mitigation, attenuation, and vehicle access point from Malden Road. Before I continue, just to note that between finalising the report and this meeting today, we have received one letter of objection from the Right Honourable Priti Patel, which members have been provided a copy of in full. Having considered the points raised, officers are of the view that it doesn't raise any fundamentally new issues, and therefore the feeling is that these points have been addressed within the officer report, so we don't have any further comment. It's woken up now, that's good. Okay, great. So in terms of site location, the site itself consists of two parcels of land. Closest parcel here, just north of Malden Road, and then a sort of larger parcel behind, totalling approximately 6 hectares overall. It lies southeast of the village of Hatfield Peveril, and the A12 is sort of, fundamentally sort of off the screen here to the north. The land isn't currently in agricultural use. You can see sort of the parcel behind is in arable, and the closest parcel to the road is still being used in connection with Bovington's farm, which lies to the east here. There's a sort of dilapidated barn on the site, and it's currently being used for sort of storage of building materials and vehicles. There's a public right-of-way which passes along the eastern boundary of the site here, and within the site boundary itself there is a gas main crossing the site. Listed buildings have been marked on the map here for you. They're Grade 2 listed, Everbond Cottages and Cottage and Grained Cottage here on the green, and Brewery House. You can see in this location here the dwellings which were consented behind the Wheatsheaf pub, sort of under construction, and a further sort of 7 dwellings were then permitted to the rear of Candletree, so this sort of area. And in this area here, this is where the Glen Eagles Way scheme has been consented. Bovington's farm, as I said, sort of lies here to the east, and Bovington's bungalow is here. Closest neighbour on this side is Marnie's, which I'll point out to you later. And as you can see, Malden Road's in the south there, with a very strong hedge line at the moment bordering it, and Utling Road and its junction here around the green in the south. So So this is just a photograph here from the green, really. This is the junction with Utling Road. This is the brewery, the listed buildings sort of around here. You can see the hedgerow just on the border of the site, and Marnie sort of somewhere around here, just behind that. This is looking the other way, so going out of Hatfield Peveril. Again, the green itself in the foreground, the hedgerow to the site. And as you can see, it's sort of rather open, and there are some very strong hedgerows elsewhere, sort of bordering other properties in the vicinity. This is sort of travelling up the public right-of-way, sort of going north, really. You can't actually see the site in this shot because it's sort of very overgrown. There's another area of land in between which isn't owned by the applicant. So it's just sort of really out of sight here. And as you then break free from that vegetation, the public way sort of continues, public right-of-way continues, and the site is there to your towards the east. And this is the sort of clump of trees area where those lakes you saw in the map, Bovington 2, which are fishing lakes, sort of from reclaimed quarry site, sit. Again, that's the lake there, and this is the site's southern boundary with those properties on Maldon Road. And you can see extending Bovington's sort of farm approximately here, really. You can see the smoke, there is a sort of gentle slope in the land, sort of travelling northwards, sort of the land drops. And this is really looking directly at it, so this is sort of really Maldon Road here. You can see, pick out just there those new houses behind the wheat sheaf, and Bovington's farm, and its bungalow sort of really behind this area of trees here. Again, looking at it, sort of square on there. Again, this is where the Bovington's farm is, and you can see the land sloping again down to the lake here. And this is from really within the parcel of land which is closest to Maldon Road. So you can see that there's obviously a dilapidated barn here. There's some storage going on, and that there's still quite a lot of vegetation really between the site itself and Bovington's and the bungalow, and then also this is the existing access, which you'll see later from the other direction. Again, this is the site boundary between the two parcels. So this is sort of parcel closest to the road, and this is the parcel further away, and this is the bungalow. So that's one of the closest residential properties. And this is the other neighbour on the other side, really, Marnie's. So this is the site boundary here, marked by that fence, and you can see the relationship there. And this is just a shot really for you of Bovington's farmhouse, which can't really be seen in this shot within the context of the site. The site's off here really, but that's a view from the roadside. So a parameters plan has been provided in order to provide some reassurance in terms of how the site would be set out. You can see here there's a large area of green space in the west. There's an amount of additional planting to the boundaries. There's also footpath links across the site, linking onto the public right-of-way here, and then travelling along the north, and circular walk really right all the way up here, and then you can sort of travel through the development and down. And there's a children's play area in this location here. And the idea is that both the vegetation on this boundary and this boundary would serve to soften and filter views in terms of the wider countryside. The linear area of open space here provides wildlife buffer and that sort of opportunity for a circular route. There's a suds area just here, and then a sewage pumping station sort of just down in the corner here. Development is proposed to be largely 2 stories, 9.6 metres, with up to 2.5 stories in those areas where you can see the dots are more concentrated. That's up to an 11.5 metres. You can see that it's proposed to have a tree line access road and leading to a pocket park. And essentially, I think the concentration of 2.5 storey or potentially higher development, not that it would all be 2.5 storey necessarily, in this area here does take advantage of the landform and the fact that it's falling in these locations. So I'll just put up here. Just to point out the relocated access on Malden Road here, with housing proposed to be set behind the hedgerow. Offers the view that whilst the hedgerow is being retained, it should be maintained at a slightly lower height of 1.2 to 1.5 metres in order that the development doesn't turn its back on the green essentially and maintains that open character we've got at the moment, sort of replicating it and mirroring it. An illustrative master plan has been provided for indicative purposes only. I think officers are of the view it does require some revision, but generally does serve to demonstrate that 110 dwellings can be accommodated on the site in a policy compliant fashion. The indicative mix for that plan was to have 47% 2-bed, 37 3-bed, 10% 4-bed and 5% 5-bed. So you can see it's swung towards the smaller size of dwellings and it should indeed have no problems in being compliant with the condition which is proposed for 20% 1 and 2 beds. We were provided with a densities plan. And as far as densities are concerned, the developable area of the site itself is 3.42 hectares, giving a density of 32 dph in the developable area, but it is 18 sort of overall as a net density. And having analysed the surrounding area, which does contain a number of estate developments, it is broadly consistent with those, and also with other developments which have been recently permitted. Such as Isla Dairy and Glen Eagles Way, Stonepath Drive. So in terms of the site access works, this drawing shows you how the new access would be formed. So that's the existing access there, so that would be stopped up. Then a new access would be formed further further west, I should say. And the road would then be widened to the east in order to introduce a pedestrian refuge island in this location here. And then going into the village, the road markings would be altered and an existing pedestrian island crossing, which is here, improved. A footway would be provided all along the roadside, linking up to an existing footway which sort of commences about here, just by Marnie's. And whilst there would remain an absence of a footway on the southern side of Malden Road, so specifically here along the green, you have got footway along here and up here, and you've got the potential obviously to take other routes, perhaps quieter, more appealing routes sort of around the green itself as well, or alternatively sort of cross further up the road here. So there is sort of choice, and the Highway Authority raised no concerns in terms of highway safety in this application. So this is a photograph here just showing you the existing access, the hedgerow, and the new access would be sort of formed around here. So in order to provide the footway and road widening necessary going east from the access, 2 trees and a section of hedgerow would need to be removed, as shown by this sort of shaded area here, and you can see sort of in close up here. The trees to be removed are a category C ash tree and a category B oak tree, and 40 metres of hedgerow comprised of hawthorn. Currently it's assessed to be low quality and rather overgrown with ivy. You will note, however, that the parameters plan did show a reinstated hedgerow behind the visibility displays, and that a condition is also recommended, ensuring that the existing removed hedgerow is prioritised for planting and relocated within the site itself. The tree retention and removal plan also indicates removal of one low quality tree here in order to make way for the spine road, and a small area of hedgerow in the west here in order to provide the footpath link. Overall, however, there is a significant amount of additional planting proposed throughout the site and to the boundaries of the development. Having also reviewed the scheme in the light of the NPPF changes, it is considered that paragraph 131, which requires all streets to be tree-lined, where possible, can be complied with, given that the Illustrative Master Plan, which I'll go back to for you, this one, does already show a significant amount of trees along most of the roads. So this is just to show you the removed oak tree and the ash in the area of hedgerow. So in terms of landscape considerations, an LVIA has been submitted which confirms officers' views that the site is well contained and concealed in views from the north. It is inevitably somewhat defined to its southern extent by the proximity it already has to Malden Road, and due to the position of the landscape buffers which are proposed along its perimeter, officers do feel that it could be accommodated without giving rise to significant landscape impacts or visual impacts. And so therefore, whilst there would be a slight adverse or negligible impact that may remain over time in some places, in others there is still potential for a benefit to accrue. Specific assessment has been made by officers in respect to the requirements of the Hatfield-Peveril Neighbourhood Plan Policy, HPE 5, which is set out for you here on the screen, whereby it is felt that the important views identified of key landscape features, sort of here and in this view here, looking northeast, so that's here, such as the line of poplars within the hedgerow, as you can see here. The vegetation around the lake, sort of in the far distance here, would still obviously remain, notwithstanding the fact that these views would already be sort of highly altered by the loss of the agricultural land in the foreground, which is in fact the Glen Eagles Way site. So therefore the development itself as proposed would be between the viewpoint identified and the proposed sort of site, so really would have no impact on these features. So, as set out in the report, it is necessary, given that we do have a presumption in favour of sustainable development, to still assess the benefits against the adverse impacts of the development, but these are obviously done in a flat balance. In terms of adverse impacts, obviously we've identified the conflict with the development plan, RLP2 and CS5, which certainly CS5 is determined to be in date and carries weight, and there is a fundamental sort of point there whereby you are in conflict with the development plan, albeit not necessarily in conflict with the neighbourhood plan, and there is a partial conflict with CS8 on the basis of loss of best and most versatile agricultural land, although there's only a small section of the site which actually is classified best and most versatile. Most of it is of a poorer quality. So I think the conflict itself is in some ways, it doesn't necessarily go beyond sort of superficial level, because we haven't identified a great degree of other adverse impacts in this particular application. There is obviously still conflict with the Section 2 plan. There is loss of trees and hedgerows, although in the round, I think the picture is that there would be potentially some enhancement in terms of vegetation on the site. There is, as noted in the report, a minor localised decrease in junction capacity, but you should probably refer to the report because it's very detailed as to what's happening really in Hatfield Peveril in terms of junctions and the way that the traffic's working in that area may indeed work in the future. And obviously it's worth noting that the Highway Authority haven't objected to this application and do not regard the impact to be severe. Therefore, you know, I would strongly dissuade members from refusing the application on that basis alone. And therefore, turning to the benefits, there is obviously a delivery of market and affordable housing, and that benefit in and of itself is significant. There is the maintenance of the five-year housing supply, and the fact that the site has undertaken, via conditions to come forward quicker than is statutorily required in terms of delivery. There are associated economic and social benefits, obviously, of housing delivery, which extend beyond sort of those immediate benefits. And obviously, there is that also that flexible contribution of £2,730 per dwelling to fund a package of sustainable transport measures within Hatfield Peveril, comprising improving parking at the railway station and Hadfielder Square car park, general improvements to bus services and infrastructure, improved cycle infrastructure schemes in the locality, as well as a car club open to use by residents and members of the public, with residents' cost covered for a period of 3 years. And as noted, there is a provision of open space which exceeds the policy compliant and necessity. So turning then, in summary, the proposal does conflict with the development plan as set out. However, it is an accessible location with a genuine choice of transport modes, and officers are of the view that the flat balance suggests this would in fact be sustainable development, and therefore paragraph 11 of the MPPF provides a material consideration in order to reach a conclusion which wouldn't be in accordance with the development plan. And that is a recommendation for approval, subject to Section 106 agreement with controlling conditions. And I have just got for you a few amended reasons for conditions. So condition 7 is the condition which relates to requiring all those details which correspond to the neighbourhood plan policies. So, wheelchair units, that type of thing. And I think what just happened is that the condition below it, the reason is duplicated. So this is the correct reason. And then reason 20 is in relation to SUDs. And what had happened there was that the paragraph numbers had got out from where they were being referred to as in the 2019 NPPF, and now have just been updated from the 2021 version. And that's everything. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Catherine. Before I open it up to members, can I just ask one question? On page 57, we're talking about the lifetime home standards, and you're recommending a condition is recommended so that we meet the HO1. Have we got such a condition, and are we considering it?
Yes, that is condition 7, actually.
Just condition 7. Yeah. Sorry, I read them and I mixed it up. And I'd just like to just make one statement, really. A hedge overgrown with ivy is the best hedge for wildlife. Thank you.
Thank you.
Members. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I was just about to make a statement. I feel it's a great disappointment that both trees and hedgerows do not grow to suit developers' wishes. Or in the case of hedgerows, are attractive to the eye. We've seen this so many times recently that in many cases we've lost both mature hedgerows and trees, and whilst there's new plantings, they take years to develop. Now, they're not much use to birds, no use at all to birds and mammals. It's just a great disappointment because we see this so many times recently that they're either taken out or seriously damaged. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I think perhaps I'll start by addressing the elephant in the room, shall I, which is the 5-year land supply, which has come in for a lot of comment, and I think perhaps I'd appreciate a comment from officers on this. You know, this committee has been in a position a number of times over the last few years of approving applications which we are not necessarily terribly in favour of because we don't have a 5-year land supply. Now we have, and I can absolutely understand the comments that have come, written comments that have come in saying, well, now you've got the 5-year land supply, why are you still recommending approval? I think obviously one of the problems is it is marginal. It's not. It is only just over 5 years. We do have a very awkward and unfortunate appeal decision last week that came through when a refusal was overturned by an inspector, and I think I might like a comment from an officer on the impact of that, because the inspector did acknowledge that we had a 5-year supply, but nevertheless still allowed the appeal. So, you know, the problem with this one is there are absolutely no other objections from any of the statutory consultees. I mean, highways, which might have been, a strong point for refusal, they have found no fault with it. There really is, nothing else other than it's an unallocated site and we do have a 5-year supply. I do have a few other points to make, but could I possibly have a comment from officers on that first, please?
Thank you, Councillor Spray. Chris, would you like to respond, please?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you for the question, Councillor Spray. I'll start with the point on 5-year housing land supply, if I may. So, obviously, as members are aware, this has been a changing situation over a number of years now. It's gone up, it's gone down, depending on the assessment that has to be followed. The council has granted permission for a significant number of residential schemes over the years, and obviously members of the planning committee are well aware of this, including speculative schemes. We've got to a position now where the published supply is at 5.34 years, so we are able to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. Now, the situation remains at the moment. We have Section 1 of the local plan that has been adopted by the council. Section 2, although the examination into Section 2 has been completed, we do not have a fully adopted local plan. And therefore, we have a situation where we're still assessing applications on the basis of the current development plan, namely the local plan review, the core strategy, Section 1, and then obviously any neighbourhood plans that are in existence as well. So we do have a situation where each application, certainly for the time being, has got to be considered on its own merits. We need to carefully consider the position. Although we have a 5-year supply, it is considered to be marginally over, and it is something that we need to keep an eye on in the intervening period before hopefully Section 2 of the local plan is adopted. And on adoption, it should be clear on this. We will get a further boost in the housing land supply at that point, because we will be able to count some of the sites that have an allocation within the Section 2 plan that don't have the benefit of planning permission. So we will get an additional boost. But the NPPF is very clear that we need to be able to maintain a 5-year housing land supply. And certainly from officers' perspective, we're in a situation still at the moment that where we have a speculative application, we need to consider it on its merits. So the approach from officers' side is that where we have a scheme that is raising, clear harms, so they may be highways, there may be heritage, there may be landscape, there may be character, it may be neighbour impacts, and where we feel the balance, which, as Catherine's explained now, because we have a 5-year supply, is a flat planning balance, so it's no longer the tilted balance as it was before when we didn't have one, which is weighted towards granting permission for development. We now have a flat balance, but where those harms are identified and where we feel strongly that it's an inappropriate site, we will put forward a recommendation of refusal. However, there are some sites, including the one before you this evening, where the officer recommendation is for approval, and that is very much on the basis that, in this case, the harms are considered to be, well, very limited and in some cases non-existent, and still substantial benefits need to be attributed to the scheme. So that's how we've weighed it up. The housing land supply at the moment is still a moving situation, and as I said, it will be very much dependent on how progression takes place with the Section 2 plan. As Councillor Spray alluded to, we did receive a appeal decision last week, which members will be fully aware of, in relation to Gilder Terrace, or Brook Green, as some people will be more familiar with. So this is a speculative scheme that's on the edge of Braintree. Previously, we had an application and a subsequent appeal for 1,600 houses, which was refused by the council and dismissed at appeal. We then had a follow-up application for 120 units, so very similar in size to the application before you this evening. That application was refused by the council, went to public inquiry, and we fought hard to defend our reasons for refusal, and on that case we were identifying harm arising from that scheme. We had the appeal decision last week. It was allowed by the planning inspector. Obviously, from our perspective, from officer's perspective, very disappointing in terms of the overall result, but I think there's two things for me that stood out from that appeal decision. Firstly, the inspector's comments in terms of 5-year housing land supply. So at the actual inquiry, we had a situation where we weren't able to demonstrate a supply, and then in the intervening period, before a decision was made, we then declared we did have a supply. So the inspector effectively dealt with that through exchange of written evidence. It was not contested by the other side. So the inspector has accepted that we had a 5-year housing land supply of 5.34 years. But the inspector has said very clearly within the decision on that appeal that although that target has been reached, it's not considered to be a ceiling. And the NPPF is clear in its objective of still significantly boosting the supply of homes. So that's the first comment that really stands out, that even with a 5-year supply at the moment, the approach that inspectors have been taking is it doesn't provide us with a clear defence against speculative schemes. And the inspector disagreed with us in this particular case over the harms arising. So, and he did attribute significant benefits to the supply of housing, and particularly the supply of affordable housing in that case as well. As I said, the number of units are very comparable. The second element that stood out from that appeal decision was the amount of weight that the inspector attributed to the conflict with the development plan. And obviously, in the assessment before you this evening, we've set out in the planning balance section what we feel the weight should be afforded to each element and each conflict. With the appeal decision, the inspector considered that only limited weight should be attributed to the conflict with policy RLP2 of the local plan review and policy CS5 of the core strategy. So less weight effectively than what we are recommending and what we consider within the planning balance section of the report before you. So those are the two elements that really stood out from that appeal decision, and I do fully appreciate that these are very sensitive applications. Obviously, there's been a number within Hatfield Peveril, within the local area over the last couple of years. But the fact remains that as the local planning authority, we are required to consider each application on its merits against the policies of the development plan, unless material considerations indicate otherwise. And the balance that officers have reached in this case is that flat balance tips in favour of approval, given the limited harm and conflict. There is obviously a conflict with the development plan, given its outside development boundary. And although I disagree with the amount of weight that the inspector with the Gilder Terrace appeal has attributed, I think given the recent nature of that appeal decision, it does give an indication on the views of planning inspectors at the moment, which isn't particularly encouraging. So those would be my comments in that regard. We are in a much stronger position in terms of 5-year housing land supply, and that's a testament really to the amount of applications that have been approved by the council over the last few years, but it is not in a position at the moment where that in itself, in officers' view, would be a reason to resist speculative development proposals. But happy to answer any further questions or clarifications, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Councillor Spray.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chris, for setting out the position of officers very clearly. And I did read the appeal decision for Gilder Terrace that came through last week, and the inspector was very clear around the 5-year supply, and that he didn't find that a reason to uphold our refusal. And I think there is no doubt that does have a bearing on the application this evening. Couple of other comments from me. One on neighbourhood plans. They do work, as evidenced by the previous application that we discussed. What they can't do, and I think I'm right in saying is, what any neighbourhood plan can't do is prevent, can't prevent all development, and I don't believe they can actually put a sort of firm limit on the number of homes in schemes that come forward. I have every sympathy, I really do, with the preference expressed for small-scale growth of 30 dwellings or less, but the Hatfield-Peveril neighbourhood plan doesn't specifically say that, and as I say, I think I'm right in saying that I'm not sure it actually could. I don't think neighbourhood plans can put limits on the number of homes in developments. And I think finally for me, I noted Mr. Lee's comment in his statement that, members can be confident of a high quality development when reserve matters come forward. I sincerely hope that is the case. The application that we approved at the start of the meeting is a really good example of what can be achieved when a developer works together with officers and with the local community, and that's really important on the quality of design, layout and so on. So I, would like to hold him to that comment, whoever develops the site. I think, we do look for a very high quality of design on our developments now, and we achieved that. We've been nominated for an award last year for quality of design on one of our developments, and we do really look for something above the average now. So, well, I'm going to hope that we achieve that here. All in all, I think this is really difficult, but we have no objections from any other statutory authorities, consultees rather, and a marginal 5-year supply which did not sway an inspector in our favour last week. So with some reluctance, Chairman, I'm going to recommend officers' recommendation for approval. Move officers' recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mrs. Spray, does it find a seconder? It doesn't at the moment, so we'll move on and have... Did you wish to speak, Councillor Horner?
No, because I will second.
Thank you. Right. Any other member wish to speak? Councillor Mrs. Parker.
I do have a number of comments to make, but first of all I just would like to ask a question, and it's to do with highways. It's under the Malden local plan, approval has been given, which has been adopted, approval has been, one of the sites that's been allocated is a new Haybridge garden village of 1,300 homes, which will all come down Malden Road. There is also obviously the proposed new junction 21 for Hatfield-Peveril on the A12, which I was looking at today, and all the traffic that's going to come up Malden Road, including the traffic from Malden and the traffic from Hatfield-Peveril, will turn right when it meets the junction, the mini roundabout at the top of the hill, the junction of the B1019 and the B1137. when the new junction for the A12 is built, and I think construction is due to start in 2 years' time of the widened A12, the road will go to the south of the new A12 where it will meet a roundabout. So basically, there is what the question I wanted to ask was, in the transport assessment has been done, and I wasn't able to establish this when I looked at it, because it did seem to me that transport assessment was only up to 2025, but maybe I'm wrong. Has there been any assessment at all of the traffic implications of both the increased development in Malden and the new junction on the A12, and what implications that will have on the traffic within Hatfield Peveril?
Yeah, so a cumulative assessment has taken place, which does factor in obviously committed development, and that includes allocations. But the strategic model, as you allude to, would plan for those to come online at certain periods within, the plan period, essentially. We don't generally ask developers to extend further into the future than the time periods which have already been specified. Although, however, there has been modelling undertaken of what will happen in 6 years' time when the junction does come online, and the situation, as it's understood to be at present, is that a lot of the congestion which occurs at those junctions in Hatfield Peveril, as identified, is occurring due to traffic from elsewhere using Hatfield Peveril to access the A12 junctions, and as a rat run sort of through, really, potentially. And therefore, there's quite a lot of flexibility within the network itself for those trips to be reassigned. So, for example, if they're given other opportunities, the cars will take other routes, and therefore they don't have to just travel down that one route. And when the junction comes online, they will be attracted towards that instead. And that is why, in the longer term, there's understood to be sufficient sort of play, I suppose, within the strategic highway network overall, that the Highway Authority isn't concerned that the impacts of this particular development would be severe.
Want to come back?
Yes, I mean, I'm still not with you, really. I understood in the report that the assessment takes into account the committed development within Hatfield Peveril itself. I think I'm understanding from what you've said is that the assessment has taken into account, because you talked about the junctions. I'm not sure what junction you're talking about. Are you talking about the new A12 junction? Has that been taken into account?
Yes.
And secondly, has the impact? I mean, you talk about. I'm still not clear as to where the traffic from Malden will go. My understanding is that traffic from Malden goes up Malden Road and onto the A12 in that direction, and there isn't. So I can understand that at the moment there are the use, especially when the A12 gets blocked when there's an accident, that traffic does route off the A12 and goes through Hatfield Peveril. Obviously, that's going to stop because their two existing junctions are going to go. So I'm still not clear in my mind as to whether or not there is going to be a traffic problem down Malden Road, particularly because of the increased development within Malden.
Okay, so I suppose there's 2 points really. First of all, highways have a wider strategic module which they run, for the whole of the plan period. So they will be coordinating that on a sort of Essex-wide level, and they feed all of the committed development into that model, so that they can then ensure themselves and work with Highways England to make sure that the road infrastructure improvements are put in the correct places over the longer term. I suppose in the shorter term, as in next sort of 6 to 8 years, really, I suppose, when the new junction of the A12 is proposed to sort of kick in, that has been taken into account. I think the point is, yes, the traffic may still go up Malden Road from Malden, but the traffic won't be going up Malden Road from other locations in order to get to the junction, which is in Hatfield Peveril and its current, location at present. So those trips would be reassigned, therefore leaving further play in the network for additional loading from other angles, if you see what I mean. So generally speaking, actually, when the models run, it does suggest that that's the smaller junctions in Hatfield Peveril, so those within the village itself would improve in capacity. And because there is this, sort of in highway terms, this trip reassignment going on, because people don't want to take a route which is too congested. So because they can reassign themselves, they will, because they're not traffic that has to travel through Hatfield Peveril, and particularly when the junction comes in, they can go other routes, and therefore you don't find yourself exceeding the capacities to quite the levels as you might sort of initially expect, because there is this sort of flexibility in play in the model. I hope that makes sense.
Sorry, Chris, I can't see you there.
With apologies, Madam Chairman, if I could just come in just on that point, just one further thing to what Catherine has commented on, not going into too much detail, but one thing which might help your point, Councillor Parker, just in terms of the transport assessment that was undertaken and as part of the documentation, this is fairly standard practice. The transport consultants that were working on behalf of the applicant did engage with Essex County Council as the highway authority to agree the scope of the transport assessment that was undertaken. So this is usually quite high level at that stage in terms of analysing what would actually be modelled and how those inputs would then be taken into account. So the scope of the transport assessment and the detail of it has obviously been assessed by the County Council along with Highways England. Both highway authorities have raised no objections on that. So just taking on the point you raise in terms of how some of the committed developments have come forward, those are all elements which would have been picked up as part of those discussions with the two highway authorities. So I don't know if that helps, but I just thought I'd mention that. And again, it's standard practice for major development proposals for that scoping to be undertaken and agreed prior to a full assessment being undertaken.
Thank you, Chris. Anyone else? Councillor Wrench.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm also slightly perplexed around the 5-year land house and supply. Just a question to come back on that. 5.34 seems to be too unreliable, not quite secure enough. What kind of level are we looking at to have more confidence in that? Because I was always led to believe that if it was above 5, we were in a much more secure position. So to hear that tonight is quite confusing for me to hear.
So thank you, Councillor Wrench, for the question. So to be clear, the key change that has arisen since we've been able to declare a 5-year supply is we've gone from applying the tilted balance within paragraph 11 of the NPPF, which is weighted. It's described as the tilted balance because it's weighted towards granting plan permission for the development. So it has to be really significantly, demonstrably harmful in order to tilt it the other way to refuse permission. So the key change that's happened since we've declared a 5-year supply is we no longer have to engage the tilted balance. We have an untilted balance now, or what we call the flat balance, which is a simple assessment against weighing the harms against the benefits. So in terms of the position, things have moved on, and we are in a stronger position than where we were when we were unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing supply. However, the fact that we are able to declare one is not in itself, at the moment, a secure reason for refusal in officers' views for a speculative proposal where harms arising from it are considered to be very limited. So, as I said, we've got a number of applications that will come before this planning committee, and there will be some where we will identify that the harms are considerable, and that may be highways or heritage or neighbour impact or character or so forth, where we feel that on that flat balance we're able to clearly substantiate a reason for refusal that we feel we could defend at appeal. and where we've got clearly identified reasons, and that means that that will influence our recommendation. In this particular case, it really arises from the limited harms that through the assessment that officers have undertaken, and the limited harms with the conflict with the neighbourhood plan. There is conflict with the development plan as a whole, given its outside development limit, but the weight attached to that, when compared with the benefits of the scheme, that's where our assessment has come to the recommendation that's set out, which is to approve. So we are in a stronger position for having a 5-year supply. I couldn't, I'm afraid, put a figure in terms of what is the magical number. It would be nice for that to actually be set out, because I think that would give everybody some clarity. But the comments from the planning inspector within the appeal decision last week is not a new term that's been raised previously, in terms of 5 years is not a ceiling, or it shouldn't be considered to be a ceiling, and the NPPF is still very clear about boosting the supply of homes. So we are in a stronger position. Adoption of Section 2 of the local plan will put us in a stronger position as well. But we need to be able to maintain the supply, and that's the critical thing from a development management perspective. We need to, each year, be able to demonstrate that we are able to maintain that supply, and critically, that also means we're relying on the house builders and the developers out there to build. But that's an assessment that we will need to do each year to see what's being built out, what we've granted permission, and what the supply figure is. So I don't want to give the impression that we're in a worse state at the moment. We're in a stronger position, but each application still has got to be considered on its merits, and it's not a definitive factor in officers' view that affects the recommendation in this case. Hopefully that clarifies.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So I will now pick up the other points that I was going to make. So I do accept what Chris has said about the weight that can be applied to the adopted local plan and also the new Section 2. Although some weight can be applied to the fact it is outside the development boundary under the adopted plan, and it would also be outside the development boundary under Section 2, although I noted the comments of the inspector at that recent appeal. The only contrast I would draw to this application and that appeal was, I think the inspector did make it quite clear with that appeal that we were talking about a site that was on the edge of one of the 3 major towns in the council. This is obviously not a major town. It is classified as a key service village. My problem, I think, I'm getting to the point with Hatfield-Peveril, where I'm questioning whether this actually is sustainable development. This is where I'm struggling. Hatfield-Peveril is, it's classified as a key service village, but it's quite small. I think it's got one small co-op, and I think there's a small Boots. I think there's very, very limited employment within the village. It was a village of 1,800 houses. It's already been given permission for another 530. How big can this village go? When does the limit come? Can't just keep bolting more and more estates onto this village. I mean, it's going to be a dormitory town anyway. I noticed, interestingly, when I remember looking at this previously, actually, the ward profile on our own council website, the vast majority of people in Hatfield-Peveril drive to work. Surprisingly few actually get on the train. So yes, there is a choice, but I suppose it's the case everywhere. Do people use that choice? For many people, it's not where they're going to work, quite frankly. And the other thing that's really concerned me quite a lot is the situation with the schools. because the schools are, and it's set out in the report, are getting almost to capacity. I think there's no space left now in reception. And yes, we collect money from all these sites, and I don't know whether anything is built, any more classrooms are built or are going to be built. I mean, there is no evidence from the Education Authority as to what they're planning to do with all this money that's been collected. You know, and it's all very well. I noticed in the report that I do understand that I can't remember the expression now, but the timing of it's not front load is the expression you use, and that, you know, and I do understand that. But at the end of the day, children have got to be able to go to school. You know, the school has got to be there've got to be school places for children to go to school, and it is starting to worry me. That the other thing I noticed from the neighbourhood plan was that there was a statement that there isn't anywhere left on the school site, or whether there is any room on the school site to create additional capacity. And again, there's no evidence really from the Education Authority about how they would expand the school capacity at the two schools within Hatfield-Peveril. As far as secondary schools are concerned, I think children go to school in Whittam. There is no school transport because apparently children are expected to walk across down the side of the A12 to get to school in Whittam. Of course, none of them do. They pay for their trips, pay for the bus, whereas children elsewhere also get free school transport. So I am concerned that there isn't, in particular, the educational capacity within Hatfield-Peveril to make it sustainable. Yes, I think really those are my main points. So I am just getting to the point where I'm really questioning whether this is sustainable development. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Mrs. Parker. Anyone else wish to add anything? No. Oh, sorry, Councillor. I couldn't see you at the back. You were tucked behind Councillor Mundy. Councillor Bowers.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. It's just a sort of few comments on the going back to the 5-year supply and the neighbourhood plan as well, because you can understand how it sort of looks in regards. Obviously, there's a lot of going back to what Councillor Spray said initially about there's a lot of applications obviously that we've passed and due to the lack of the housing, the 5-year supply, and then we tell people in the report it says we have a 5-year supply, and then we sort of we still sort of recommend approval for an application even though we've got a 5-year supply, even being wafer thin or however you want to sort of explain that. You can understand sort of people thinking sort of we're getting there, and then still being told it's not quite enough, and then we can't sort of say there's a specific number we need to be at to say that's enough to protect. And also with the neighbourhood plan, I guess just to get an understanding with weight on these sort of issues. So obviously we've got the neighbourhood plan. We encourage neighbourhood plans, and then to protect areas and that kind of thing. But from what am I reading it correctly? So what we're saying in the report is kind of because it's not in the neighbourhood plan about having sort of against developments outside the boundary. Is it because it's kind of it's referenced about the preference for incremental small scale growth of 30 dwellings or less, but then it goes on to literally sort of say because it hasn't mentioned something about other. Because it doesn't clarify that completely, it kind of, I don't know, the way it's sort of worded is it's sort of, the neighbourhood plan then opens up for us to say, approve these kind of applications. So I find it a little bit hard to sort of contemplate in regards to the wait for the neighbourhood plan, because I don't want people sort of creating neighbourhood plans and then we're kind of not using it against areas, but it just feels that we're then sort of playing on words sometimes in regards, like, because it mentions like the 30 dwellings, but then we're wording it in regards, but we're sort of we're kind of ignoring that and that kind of thing. So it's just is it because this sort of information is not in the neighbourhood plan we can't afford it weight? I suppose the two questions is more about the weight of the neighbourhood plan, and also I guess the 5-year land supply. If it wasn't for the appeal decision, would we be would we have more weight tonight in regards not approving this application? Because also I guess from my point of view is we talk about the section 2 of the local plan, and then it will help us once we've got section 2 because the other allocations that can be taken into consideration. But obviously by the time that happens, we could have approval on this outlined permission tonight, but then obviously by the time we're looking at reserve matters, you know, the whole world could have changed in regards to the 5-year supply. But I guess what I'm asking for is a little bit more clarification on the neighbourhood plan part, and maybe on the 5-year supply in regards to the appeal decision. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bowers. Chris, did you want to come back?
Madam Chairman, if I could come back initially on the 5-year, and then if it's okay, I'll pass over to Catherine to address the neighbourhood plan point. So in terms of the 5-year supply, it is something which will remain a movable feast in terms of each year we're required to do the assessment and review where our 5-year housing land position is. So as I mentioned on adoption, if we're able to adopt section 2 of the local plan, but if we're able to adopt section 2, we will receive a further boost in the supply. And then each year we obviously do the carry forward, we do all the roll forwards, in terms of assessing the planning permissions that have been granted, how many houses have been built in the district and so forth. So it's something which has to be continuously kept under review. It may go up, it may go down. At the moment we are working on the basis of the objectively assessed need, obviously within section 1 of the local plan, which has been found sound, and that's how national policy is set out at the moment. But it is something which we need to be able to maintain a supply of homes. So that's ensuring that those sites with outline consents are able to come forward, and we end up getting detailed consents to enable development to commence on those. So it's something which, every site that is granted, we still need it to come forward, which is the key thing, and that's also something which is out of the council's control, because we can't compel house builders, as members are fully aware, we can't compel house builders and developers to go out and build and implement the consents that are granted. All we can do is to try to ensure that we have the consents in place, that we monitor those consents, that we try and facilitate development on those sites which have been granted permission in principle, and we bring forward appropriate detailed consents to maintain that supply. But it is something which just constantly needs to be kept under review. Just in terms of the recommendation, obviously the agenda papers were published prior to us receiving that appeal decision in Braintree. I think from my perspective it's reaffirmed the recommendation just purely on that point. But I think that the key thing with that appeal decision is it does give an insight in terms of how inspectors are viewing these types of applications and some of the comments that they are putting within appeal decisions, particularly around housing more generally. I think one last point before I hand over to Catherine on the neighbourhood plan. I think the other point, just in terms of appeals, and there was a comment made by the Parish Council, actually a public question time on this. From an officer's perspective, there's never been any reluctance to fight an appeal, and clearly where we feel that there has been sound grounds for refusal and those applications have come before planning committee and have been refused, where we've had appeals, we have robustly defended them, and we've had funding made available for us to fight those public inquiries or hearings, and an awful lot of hard work has gone into seeking to defend those appeals. Some successfully, some we've ended up losing, like the one last week, but there's never been any reluctance that hasn't factored in. It's always been based, the recommendation has always been based on the planning merits of the application, and as I said, we've always sought to defend appeals where we've had them. On the neighbourhood plan, I'll pass over to Catherine just to explain the nuance point in this particular case with Hatfield Peveril and the assessment and the weight point, if that's okay, Catherine.
Before we go over to Catherine, can I just put on the planning appeals and things? Inspectors do make different decisions. I mean, we've been absolutely surprised in the past when we've had similar applications that have had different appeal results. We've mentioned this ourselves, between ourselves. Gosh, that inspector came to a totally different decision. So we are pinning everything on the decision of one inspector, and it could, it could be different. Now I'll go over to Catherine.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so in terms of the Hatfield-Peveril Neighbourhood Plan, it does form part of the development plan. It is a very relevant document, and the policies within it are not judged to be out of date. So they've been, given full consideration as to the extent to which this application complies with them or not. However, the policies are, the policy wording. They are not the background text which is provided around them within the neighbourhood plan. So, and the way that this particular neighbourhood plan is written, it sort of does tell a story about how, the neighbourhood plan has developed really for each policy and how it's come about. So it offers you some background, but that background in itself does not have any sort of standing in terms of the criteria judgment which you need to make in terms of whether it complies with the policy or not. So in the case example of the reference to the parish explains that they have a preference for small-scale growth, and they say that originated from a concern that larger sites would detract from the rural nature of the parish. And that sort of implied potentially that they don't feel that the larger sites can necessarily be sufficiently creative to sort of limit their impact on the character of the settlement. That criteria did not translate into the policy wording itself. The policy wording itself requires the density, layout, height and elevational design of housing developments to respond to their context. So I think that's where the difference is, that's where the nuance is, and that's where the test that you need to be making is. And they require them to be in harmony with the character and appearance of the surrounding area. So there is no sort of limitation on the number of dwellings which are acceptable. It is a judgment as in their impact, I suppose, really, visual impact, and how in keeping they are with the character of the surrounding area. And so that's the judgment I would stress that you need to make really in this particular policy. And also I suppose I think it's also alluded to, there's this question of whether there is a conflict with the development plan on the basis that the development plan draws boundaries around the settlement of Hatfield-Peveril, and this sits outside it. But officers have taken legal advice on this subject and are of the view that that boundary was just a reproduction of the boundary which is in the adopted local plan, and therefore the conflict is with the local plan and not with the neighbourhood plan, because the neighbourhood plan does not contain a policy which says you shall not develop outside of the settlement boundary. That policy which you're conflicting to is in the local plan, and therefore there isn't essentially a conflict with the neighbourhood plan policies themselves. The neighbourhood plan doesn't set its own boundaries because it doesn't attempt to allocate sites, and the measure that you are measuring here is the district's measure. It is not the measure of how much development Hatfield-Peveril has taken. And I don't think, I suppose I would stress from my professional view, is that you shouldn't underestimate the importance which has been put by the government on the presumption in favour of sustainable development. It sits at the heart of the Part 1 plan. Essentially, we are saying that this proposal complies with that policy, SP1, but there is still a conflict with the development plan on the basis that it doesn't conflict, it's outside the boundaries set within the local plan itself. So, and that's fundamental. But I would just sort of stress, I suppose, that the NPPF is sort of sets out the guiding principles, and that it's impacts that you need to be sort of focusing on, rather than sort of anything perhaps that's a more superficial breach of the policy in and of itself.
Thank you, Catherine. Councillor Spray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Madam Chairman, I suspect that some of my colleagues may be in conflict over this application tonight. I think I count myself in one of those, but it's really to do with the comments of sustainability. And I note that the size of the village, I think it must be remembered that actually contained in the report that there are sufficient facilities that are well within walking distances, which is also going to be part of government policy. The fact that there's going to be very good communication with regards to road movements, the network with the A12, and it's also very close to rural aspects as well. So I think from many points of view, difficult as it may be with the expansion and taking into account the neighbourhood plan, I think overall this is going to effectively contribute, not only, as has been mentioned by Councillor Spray, it needs to be really top-class quality housing, but I think overall in the long term it's actually going to contribute to the community as a whole, because none of the statutory authorities have really come back very strongly and said, actually, this isn't going to work. They've all said, actually, it is going to work because we don't actually object to it. And there is going to be financial considerations that I think, importantly, will help build towards this community. And it is obvious that it is going through a growth because of its geolocation as well. So I think overall, reluctantly, in many respects, I have to support the government policies that are coming and that they want to see, because a lot of this is walkable. It may well be in the future that there'll be a possibility of e-scooters to get around, but the schools are walkable, the facilities are walkable, the train facility is walkable. So my understanding of that is that it's overall a sustainable location. I take on point my colleagues' comments about the 5-year, but then I think that is a movable feast, and we haven't got a Section 2 plan in place. It's not cast iron. I don't think anything is in planning, really. So I think overall, taking into account the flat balance, the tilted balance, whichever balance, I think the balance overall is a sustainable location with that walkability. But the fact that it's outlined gives us the opportunity to ensure a better build in the future. And I do like the green spaces that are indicative anyway, but I do have concerns potentially. But it is limited to 110 houses. I know some people may say, I think the density is slightly high. I would like to see that lower. I would also like to see that whoever develops it comes forward with some single-level adaptive living, so that communities can actually sustainably move and stay in that village, because at the moment a lot of the planning applications don't seem to have adaptive living within that, and I think that's an opportunity to build that into this community. Thank you.
Councillor Wrench.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've heard the term on a number of occasions today regarding this as a sustainable location. If it was a sustainable location, would it have not been allocated in Section 2 of the local plan? Could I just ask a question to officers? Was this ever considered to be a site? And was it ruled out or considered at any stage in the build-up to Stage 2 of the local plan?
Madam Chairman, I might have to pass over to Catherine on the second part. I must admit I'm not sure whether or not the site was considered or not. Just on the sustainability point in terms of the hierarchy, though it is it's obviously not a main town, but it is as identified as a key service village, which is the next tier down effectively in terms of the plan. But Catherine, are you able to clarify on the the allocation point?
Yeah, we've had a response from our policy section, and they usually do mention whether it's been put forward sort of previously as an allocation, and in this case there is no mention of that. So I would draw the conclusion that it had not.
So for that reason, I don't really agree with this then being a sustainable location, because I would have hoped that it would have been considered as being an allocated site at some stage and then maybe ruled out for one reason or another. So I'm going to propose that we refuse this application.
Thank you, Councillor Wrench. Does that find a seconder?
Madam Chairman, you've got a motion to approve the application,
Yes.
so Councillor Wrench would simply vote against that motion if he can't put a proposal to refuse.
Sorry, it's a long time since we had this happen. Okay. Does anyone else wish to speak before I move on to the Councillor Mrs. Parker?
May I make a separate point, Madam Chairman, one I haven't made before? It's if this application does get granted, it's on the section 106. I noticed that it's the point about the money for the highways. I personally would rather see money go to providing a school, a transport to secondary school from Hatfield Peveril.
Mm-hmm.
Would we be able to request that? It was a bit late.
Too late, I think.
So, Madam Chairman, Councillor Parker, thank you for the question. I think on this point we've got to be led by the Stat Consultee, and as I understand it, it is simply a policy of the Education Authority. I think that's the issue here in terms of the transport factor, because we've come across that, I think, in relation to the previous applications in Hatfield Peveril, and obviously the tests for a planning obligation, it needs to be necessary and so forth. So I think in terms of what's been identified in the report, that's obviously come from and been influenced by the statutory consultees with the consultation responses that they've put in. So, yeah, I would say in this case it wouldn't be justified, and we wouldn't have a basis to require that.
Thank you, Chris. Well, members, I think we've given this quite a good airing, and this application has been recommended for approval. It's been moved by Councillor Mrs. Spray. It's such a long time ago, I've nearly forgotten, and seconded by Councillor Horner. And I'm going to put that to the vote first. All those in favour of granting this application? 1, 2, 3, 4. Those against? 2, 3, 4. Abstentions? 1, 2. That is a split vote. I always say that I have to go with policy, but the policy on this one seems to be so split in half. I am split in half as well. And I would have to find some really good reasons for refusal. That is the problem. So I'm going to have to vote for approval because I cannot think of any relevant reasons being mentioned this evening other than sustainable development and unsustainable, which I don't think would carry with an inspector. I do feel on the amount of land we have, we would be possibly on the right side. So I am going to have to vote for this application, and that means that this application has been granted. I thank you all for your considerations this evening. It's been quite a delicate decision to make, and it has been rather a tiring one to listen to, because I think we've all been rather reluctant to make the what I think should have been the correct decision. And I'll say thank you and good night, everyone, and thank you, officers, and thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Tim and Chris. Thank you.